Amen. Please be seated. Ken, could I ask you to do music for worship at this moment? Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence, it's living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken to me, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence, it's living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken through me, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you. And I'm lost without you. I'm lost without you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for that ministry and song. You know, it's interesting. I was reading an article not that long ago written by someone who said that they did not like that song because for some reason, they thought the line that says, "I'm desperate for you," was, I don't know, too needy. I'm like, I'm needy. I don't know about that woman. I am needy, and I know another thing. I am desperate for God. I'm desperate for God every day, but particularly in this time of uncertainty as we seek our way forward. Again, I am desperate for God, and I make no apologies for that. Actually, that is part of my testimony. I am desperate for God. Now, it might not be the description of God that some of us have been indoctrinated into, but the true, pure Spirit of God and God's love as manifested through Jesus Christ, I am desperate for it because I know where my help comes from. And Washington Plaza Church, we must remember from whence our help comes also. Amen. So thank you for reminding us of that, Ken. Listen for the reading of the word. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead 4 days." Then Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And so they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always heard me, but I say this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." So friends, I want to just share a few moments with you on the subject. A change is going to come. A change is going to come. This marks the third Sunday that we have worked with this Bible story. It was not an accident. I wanted us to stay in this text and just really allow it to speak whatever it would speak to us, particularly in this precipitous moment. And so the first week, if you remember, we were on the roadside with Mary and Martha as they met Jesus along the way and asked him the question, "Jesus, what took you so long? If you had been here, our brother would not have died." And so we wondered, along with Mary and Martha, whether Jesus had arrived and whether it was too little, too late. And what we took from this text that day was how Jesus ministered to them in their grief without trying to push them beyond it. Ministered to them, grounded them in his goodness, reminded them of the goodness of God in that moment on the roadside. And then last week we engaged this story again. And this time, in light of the disturbing election results that will have very far-reaching impacts for our nation, and particularly for those who will be most targeted, the poor, the immigrant, minority populations, LGBTQ people, and our very public education system. And so we acknowledged when we were here together last Sunday the deep grief that we were feeling. It was real. And we were reminded, as Mary met Jesus on the road, and it says that Jesus began to weep, we were reminded that even in our times of great pain and travail, we do not weep alone. We never weep alone. Jesus wept even though he knew what was about to happen at the tomb, because Jesus does not leave us to weep alone. Jesus does not step away from our pain. Jesus does not chastise or rebuke us for hurting. Jesus weeps with us. And we were reminded also that our outcries, our laments, are sacred and necessary. They are not an indication of a lack of faith. They're just an indication of our humanity, which Jesus shared and affirmed. You know, last week I was rather surprised because I received several texts and comments from various media saying how helpful and healing that service was for those not only who were in this sanctuary, but for those who did watch online. Most of us came to church last week out of need. We had no overarching agenda other than to be a community before God, united in lament. Sometimes it is important to read the room and minister accordingly. And so last week we read the room together. and we did what was necessary. And now we are here. End of the line. Today, Lazarus has been raised, and Jesus has directed those who were assembled outside to untie him and let him go. And we have that moment of release, of celebration. Say, yay, Lazarus is back. It was almost like a Hallmark movie happy ending as we fade to black. And everything was all better. The end. Well, friends, one of my favorite professors in seminary was a woman, a Catholic nun, actually, by the name of Janet Walton. And Janet was a no-nonsense kind of person. And she did not let you get away with simple and easy answers. She taught in the preaching and worship department, and she was the person who actually graded and evaluated my very first written and delivered sermon in seminary. And I got to tell you, I thought it was pretty good. I thought I had nailed it. It was about Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, which we encountered that text a few weeks before, right? The blind beggar on the road who, when he heard that Jesus was calling to him, got up and ran to Jesus. So that was the point of my sermon, right? It was run to Jesus. That was it. And I had my little rhetorical flourishes and my alliteration and all of that stuff that I'd heard other preachers do. And so I presented my sermon in person, and I handed in my written sermon, and when I got my sermon back, at the bottom of my sermon, she wrote this question: and then what? Run to Jesus, and then what? You see, she was one who always pushed me to move beyond those rhetorical flourishes and those easy answers. Sometimes they suffice, but not a constant appetite of it. And then what? Lazarus, come out. And he came out with his feet and his hands and his face bound. And Jesus said, untie him and let him go. And then what? What happened the next hour or the next day or even into the foreseeable future? Our text does not necessarily tell us that, although just a few verses down it does say that the resurrection of Lazarus was greatly troubling to many people. And so many people were in awe and came to faith because of it. Others were frightened, and those in religious authority decided we need to kill Lazarus as soon as possible. And then what? And so as I read this Lazarus story and I imagined his once dead but now alive body stumbling out of the tomb, I wondered, and then what? I mean, it's very comforting to presume that Lazarus picked up right where he left off, that they unwrapped him and he was the picture of health, that he had evidently just been in some state of suspended animation. So it was almost like just hitting the pause button and taking it off. And Lazarus just, picked up right in mid-step where he had left off. You hit on pause and the film just resumes where it was, as though nothing had happened. But as we face this unknown time ahead, the Spirit whispered to me, maybe Lazarus was changed. Maybe Lazarus, being called out of the tomb, came out of the tomb as a changed man, being called back out into a changed world. And so what I'd like to draw your attention to, if you have your bulletin, we're going to engage our senses. If you look on the front of the bulletin, you will see an icon of Lazarus. It is an old and ancient icon. It shows the signs of wear and tear. The line that runs down the center of that is the result of fire and water damage. This is a Lazarus who has been through a lot throughout the ages. And if you look at his eyes, they are dark, but they're also timeless. It is though they are looking into the beyond. It's as though he has wisdom, perhaps even a sad wisdom, that he brings with him. Turn your bulletin over. This is another icon of Lazarus. And icons are something that are often misunderstood. People often think that icons are things that people worship. That is not what an icon is intended to do. An icon is intended to be a space for reflection and meditation. As you gaze upon the icon, we open our spirit to hear what the Spirit is saying to us in that moment. And so look at these eyes. These are eyes that say they've seen some things. You know, there's a quote attributed to Robert De Niro from Raging Bull, you know, where he goes, I've heard things. I've heard things, you know. Well, this icon of Lazarus, when I look at his eyes, very big, very searching. And so it leads me to ask the question, what does he see and what has he seen? Did he gaze differently upon Mary and Martha? Did he come back into the world looking at it different, through a different perspective? Or did he just get resurrected and there was no change? Every experience that we have in this world is fodder for reflection. And in some way or another, ought to change us, push us farther into the way of love. So what if the Lazarus who went into the tomb was not the same Lazarus who came out of the tomb? What happens if we let go of our sense that everything was exactly the same and Lazarus just picked up right where he left off? What if we let go of our insistence that things remain the same, and even when something is resurrected, it's supposed to look, act, walk, and talk exactly like what it was before? You know, I use a lot of sacred texts in my experience, and if you've listened to me for a long time, you know a lot of those come from popular music. So as I was reflecting on this, David Bowie started singing in my ear. David Bowie, okay, who knows David Bowie? Alrighty, okay. In the 70s, David Bowie recorded a song called Changes. Cha-cha-cha-cha changes. Okay, I see the nods. And this is what the chorus of that song says. Cha-cha-cha-cha changes. Turn and face the strange. Don't want to be a richer man. Cha-cha-cha-cha changes. We're going to have to be a different man. Time may change me, but I can't trace time. And then he says farther down, I watch the ripples change their size, but never leave the stream of warm impermanence. Changes. Turn and face the strange. Time may change me, but I can't trace time. Changes. Lazarus, you in your tomb, you hear the voice of Jesus calling you from the depths, calling you out of death, calling you out of that darkness, calling you out into this world, even though you're still bound up and encumbered. WPBC family, on this Stewardship Sunday, we hear the Spirit calling us into life, into this new world. We hear the Spirit calling us and saying, turn and face the strange, the unfamiliar, the new. And so the question is, are we willing and ready to turn and face the strange? Because, beloved, oftentimes, becoming our best selves is connected to our ability to bury a previous version of who we used to be. We serve a God of resurrection. We serve a God of new life. And so often, becoming our best selves for this moment and for the moments to come is connected to our ability to bury a previous version of who we used to be. Not in disrespect, not in disregard, but realizing that God is calling us to something new. I thought about people, I've been one of these people at some times in my life, who lose a lot of weight. And some of us are so excited about the change in our body size that we run out, and the minute we can squeeze into a smaller size, we do it. We can't breathe, but we look good, right? Yes. And there are those who move in that direction. But you know what's a lot more common, especially for those who have lost a great amount of weight? They have difficulty accepting that they aren't what they were before, that they don't take up as much space, they don't need as much room in their clothes. And so they continue to wear clothes that don't fit them anymore, that are far too big for them, not because they can't afford to buy new clothes. I mean, there are those for which that is the case. But for many of them, it's just because we have difficulty accepting that we are smaller, that things have changed. My cousin Philip, and some of you know him, and you know that he was absolutely my heart. And Philip was about 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed about 160 pounds. But at one point in his life, when Philip was under a lot of stress with his job, he stress ate. He kept one of those blue containers of those Dutch sugar cookies or whatever they are in his office drawer, and he would just eat them all the time. So he got big for a period. But after that, he came back down to his regular size and yet continued to go to stores and buy 3XL clothes. And they were just flapping around him. But he could not accept the fact that he wasn't big anymore. We're not big anymore. I said, we might blow back up later, but right now we're not big anymore. So the question is, are we ready not to be a richer man dripping with wealth, although that would be good? Are we ready to be a different man, a different community, a different child of God that is suited for this day and for the time to come? Amen. I wonder, how might Lazarus' values have changed as a result of what he experienced? I wonder if perhaps this revelatory experience that we had, he came out and he was less attached to his past. Perhaps he was less attached to materialism. Perhaps he was less attached to those things that he had done just as a matter of habit. Because Lazarus was a changed man. When Jesus told Lazarus to come out, the text says it this way, and the dead man came out. And the dead man came out. The work wasn't done at that moment. It didn't say he was alive, and it says the dead man came out, because he was still in the wrappings of death. He was still in the wrappings of what had transpired before. He wasn't fully alive in that sense, just as we sit here now, but there's still something in us that is not fully alive, something in us that needs to wake up, something in us that needs to have deeper faith, something in us that needs to realign our perspective on the world and what we deem is important and worthy and righteous. Lazarus came out, but he was still bound by his past. And Jesus instructed those who were outside the tomb to unbind Lazarus and let him go forward into the world. And so Jesus is telling each of us at this moment, even those that he commanded to unbind, turn and face the strange. Unbind Lazarus, who he is now that my Spirit has worked on him. Turn and face not just the same old Lazarus that you always knew, but turn and face this new Lazarus, even though there may be some aspects of him that seem strange. It might not be the same old Lazarus that you remember from the good old days, but that is okay, because God has touched him. God has done a work on him. God has spoken his Spirit over him. And so the Lazarus who came out of the tomb and then was unbound was in essence a new creation. God, in raising him, I submit to you today, made him a different man, still Lazarus, but changed and different, and prepared for whatever lay ahead. Because again, the little bit that we know about Lazarus after this, this resurrection moment is that everything wasn't hunky-dory. That there were some people who were upset, frightened by what they had experienced. There were some who did not trust Lazarus and did not trust this Jesus and thought that it was a whole bunch of magical mumbo jumbo. Lazarus had changed. The world around him had changed, and yet he continued to live forward by faith. Beloved, our pledges of time, talent, and treasure that we sort of, trip off of our tongue in this beautiful alliteration is dependent upon our willingness to turn and face the strange. That is true for this community as a whole. That is true for those who find themselves, their relationship with this church in terms of employment changing. Turn, face it, and believe by faith that God is calling each of us into a new understanding of who we are, into a new day of liberation. And sometimes, again, we have to let go of our past identities in order to move forward into what God would have us to be today. God is calling us to be unbound from the ways of doing and being to which some of us have become accustomed. There is no turning back. There is no hitting the pause button and saying, oh, and when things are better, we'll just hit the button and pick up right where we left off. No, that is not the reality of life. This life that God has promised to walk with us and talk with us and hold us as we journey forward. There is no golden past to be reclaimed, because the past is like these icon pictures. It's something that's wonderful to gaze upon and to reflect upon, but it is not life-giving in the way that living in the reality and the vitality of God would be life-giving. It's good to glance backward every now and then, but you don't let that dictate your way forward. We are walking forward, unbound, clear-eyed, not fully sure where we're headed, because as I've said many times before, we make the path by walking, and God is faithful to reveal the way forward, sometimes just one step at a time. But we go forward unbound and clear-eyed, trusting God to lead us forward into the strange as we walk together into 2025. Bowie wrote in his song, "I watch the ripples change their size, but never leave the stream of warm impermanence." Even the decisions that we make in 2025 are impermanent. They're not going to be written in stone. They're not going to last forever either. But we do everything that we do actually in the stream of impermanence because we know that tomorrow is not promised to any of us. But this stream of impermanence in which we swim, sometimes with barely a ripple on the surface and sometimes with lots of angry, crashing waves, is all held and surrounded by God's love, which is the true ground of our beings. Changes are not forever, but they are for now. The past is an illusion, and the only true permanence we have is in the eternal love of God, as expressed through our personal relationship with God, God's relationship with us, and our relationship with our wider community, and even our relationship with ourselves. Another prophet, musical prophet, who spoke this week was Kris Kristofferson. Kris Kristofferson actually made his transition to the world beyond. It was a week or maybe 2 weeks ago. And most of us know Kris Kristofferson as an actor, Star is Born, different things. But he also, in his earlier years, was a songwriter. And one of his most famous songs is one that we have all probably heard sung. This says, "One day at a time, sweet Jesus. One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that is all I'm asking of you. Give me the strength to do all the things that I have to do. Yesterday is gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. So, Lord, for my sake, help me to take one day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that is all we are asking of you. Give us the strength to do all the things that we have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be ours. So, Lord, for our sake, help us to take one day at a time. Lord, for your sake and our sake, help us to take it day by day, step by step, each day strange but new." Beloved, we will need each other during this rocky time ahead. Amen. We do not know what it promises, but I am clear on this. We will need community for these days ahead. And by faith, we always say that the long arc of history is a long arc, but that it bends toward justice if we help bend it. If we help bend it. And some of us, some churches, some individuals may have a mighty strong arm and they can bend that arc. But a small community also has power. A small community can also be used by God. A small community can also help bend that arc toward justice. We are such a small community. And so, again, as we in gratitude acknowledge all of these pledge forms, as in a few weeks to come we seek to fill out our coverage, our volunteer coverage, so that the processes of our church can go forward, know that God is not through with us yet. God is calling us out of the tomb. God is asking us to be unbound from pasts and histories that might no longer give life, but might be restricting us. God calls us forward. And in closing, I was reminded of another rock and roll prophet, Sam Cooke, who wrote one of the songs most deeply identified with the civil rights movement. We all know "We Shall Overcome." But there were many popular musicians who were speaking, writing, and singing prophetically into that moment. And so Sam Cooke wrote this. He said, "I was born by the river in a little tent, and just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know a change is going to come." And so what I say to you is, I know a change is going to come. It's coming whether I wanted it to come or not. We know that a change is going to come. But what we know is that the love of God does not change. So let us be part of that love. Let us be part of that change. Let's turn and face the strange, knowing that God will give us the strength to face it one day at a time. Amen? And may this be so.